Good rising, brethren. This is Big Judah coming to you guys from California. Before I begin, give all praises to the Most High, Yahweh. Acknowledgement to the earthly mother. Who is wisdom? Who is the Holy Spirit? Acknowledgement to Yahweh Shai. I pray that the Most High blesses this lesson this afternoon, gives more knowledge and understanding of the events of the past, in order to understand the events that are currently happening on the earth. So we get a much better understanding of the things that are soon to come on the earth. Brethren, we're going to be getting into a book that one of my brothers from back east sent me a few days ago. I just received the book yesterday, and as I was reading through it, there was so much information that it was just absolutely amazing. But one thing is that there was one, we're just going to get into 2 pages of this book, but it did a great job of talking about the giants and the things that are going on in the past, but it was using other books. It wasn't just using the Bible, it was using Jubilees, Sirach, Enoch, Jubilees, I think I said that already, among other books. And it was just very, very well put together and a lot of really good information. And, you got like a lot of people, you got a lot of Gentiles who have had their time of just being able to just say certain things, like say where the Holy Land is, and not have to prove it, because they have forced everything to have happened in the Bible over into 3 parts, totally excluding the 4th part of the world, because of course they were not aware of it. They were not allowed to visit it. They did not have any of the information from the 4th part. So when they took our scriptures, they had to apply it to themselves. So they had to go ahead and make everything have to fit, over there. And we'll be getting into that even later on in some other videos and some other information that I've come into. But then you have, and they've elevated themselves to giving themselves these titles: PhDs, masters, archaeologists, cartographers, everything else. And they've elevated their people into all these positions in order to push the narrative that everything happened in the 3 parts. Does that make any sense when you actually start thinking about all these things that were happening way before 1492 to our people? And the fact that the 10 tribes aren't even really discussed that much in the Bible as far as prophecy is concerned, and anything going on after 70 AD there's nothing in there. So stuff's open to conjecture. So it would make sense that there's going to be a whole lot of other events that were not going on in the 3 parts. Now, here's the book we're going to get into today. Well, hold on before I do that. And then we have a lot of camps who are just laughing at the notion that the Americas could actually be the homeland, or that a lot of the things that were going on in the scriptures were happening actually over here in the Bible. But why is that? Because just like the Gentiles have elevated themselves into positions where you have to prove things, you have to prove them wrong. A lot of camps have done the same thing. They elevate themselves to the fact that, well, we were here first. We believe that everything happened over there in so-called Israel. But why do they believe that? Because that's what they were taught by the Gentiles. Why do they still believe that? Because they refuse to look into any other books, any other information. But like I said, we're going to get into another book right now that actually they admit that there's no archaeological evidence that proves many of these things that were happening during the time of Joshua actually happened over there. See, they said that all this stuff happened over there. There is very little to no archaeological proof that at those times these events happened over there in the so-called Middle East. So what do? Instead of saying, hey, you know what, maybe this isn't the land, maybe this isn't the place that these things happen, let's go and explore and look at maybe the 4th part, the last part that we got to, because maybe they happened there. No, they don't say that. They just say, well, these things must not have happened at all because they didn't happen where we say they happened. You see, that's their mindset. It's either their way, and the way they think, or it just didn't happen, as opposed to looking at other parts of the world where this possibly took place. But we got many in our own nation who take the Gentiles' words for absolutely everything and don't question anything that they say. So that's fine. Like I said, hey, you can laugh, you can think it's a joke and whatever else. Soon enough, the Most High's already proven the fact that there are other books. He's fulfilling prophecies from these other books as well. So if you don't want to believe it, that's fine. You can stay on the late train and you can get it later. But eventually everyone's going to see that the Most High is going to raise up his people in the lands of their captivities. And he's going to restore the lands and his people, just like he said he would. Now, this is the book right here. I would suggest you pause the video and go and look for the book right now. I said, because there weren't very many available. And a lot of them were actually also coming from Europe, from the United Kingdom. So I would suggest you go ahead and pause the video before we get into it and try to ascertain your copy right now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm only going to read a couple of pages for today, okay? Between the Lines, this is chapter 8. This is where, I don't just read right from the beginning. I'll kind of skip around, look for things that are important or catch my eye, or the Most High would just have the book open up to where it is he wants me to read. That's exactly what happened right here. Chapter 8, Between the Lines, in defense of ancient traditions. There is a danger for any author who shares the research behind his fictionalized storytelling. If he reveals what really happened as different from his story, then readers may have their story spoiled, much like a child who is told the true story behind Santa Claus. If he shares the choices he makes of which evidence he chose over others, then the magic and mystery is ruined for those who prefer their imagination to the historic details. But since I have established a kind of tradition by providing appendices in each of the books of the Chronicles of the Nephilim, I have decided to continue that dangerous tradition with the hopes of inspiring readers to go deeper in their study of the Bible than daily devotions and inspirational readings. And that's what we should be doing, going deeper into readings and deeper into study, and not just living off of what someone else has told us things mean. Retelling the story of the Tower of Babel and the life of Abraham is a particularly difficult task. The problem is that the further back in history one goes, the murkier are the waters. And anything in the 4th millennium BC Mesopotamia is complete guesswork, biblically speaking. Anything before the Davidic monarchy around 1000 BC is being increasingly contested by archaeological interpretations of the Near Mideast. So the further back they go, the murkier it gets. Now, we know that when the Spaniards got here, they got a hold of our records, and they realized that the records over here were much more accurate than the things that they had over there in the three parts. Hence, many of our records have been stolen. They said they burned them, but do you really believe if they got records that were more detailed, they were going to just burn all these records? No, they were going to keep them for themselves. And they got all these places where they keep all these records. They keep all this stuff. Okay? They've been hiding this entire time. So that's why when people say, well, I want some records from the time of Enoch, I don't have those records. Well, instead of asking us about them, why don't you find the people who are hiding all these records and go ask them? There's a reason why all these records from all the way back then, pre-antediluvian and everything else, are hidden. Okay? Let's see here. And like I said, they're even tell you right here, anything before the Davidic monarchy around 1000 BC is being increasingly contested by archaeological interpretations of the Near Mideast, because of many of the things that are talked about in scriptures or talked about even before that, they can't find over there. Archaeology is not lining up. The biblical scholarly consensus is that Abraham lived around 2000 BC in Mesopotamia, but the evidence for this is thin and largely anecdotal. So see, now they're starting to sit there and say all their evidence is very thin. When you really start to examine the evidence of what they say, so they've been allowed to just say things and people don't question anything. People don't do any research. But now that people are doing more research and looking for things, they're not finding the evidence to support what they've been told. The best that can be offered is that there are some customs discovered in second millennium archives like Ebla and Mari that are similar to some customs in the patriarchal narratives. Famous Egyptologist Kenneth Kitchen elucidates these similar customs, such as treaty types, patriarchal proper names, patriarchal religion, slave prices, the use of camels, and other cultural customs. Well, we had camels over here as well. So see, that's why they got rid of a lot of the animals that were here and put them over there to make it seem like all these things were happening over there. But David Noel Friedman points out that such cultural connections are not very reliable in establishing dates because the Middle Bronze pattern of social custom and practice survived basically unchanged for centuries in certain localities in the Near East. So just because they had certain traditions, that doesn't mean that that's when these things happened. It happened over there. So as it says, all these little things that they've been saying to us about where these events happened are quickly becoming unraveled. When they really have to prove what they say, they can't. It's no different than when you have a conversation with a Christian or a Catholic and you start talking to them about what's really in the Bible. Forever, they've been able to just say whatever they wanted to say, and no one questioned them. Now that the people have been raised up, and we start to actually really ask them to explain certain things and certain dogmas they believe, they can't do it. So that goes with our scriptures, and as well as where and when they said these things happened. Of all the events that occur in the Abraham narrative, none of them correspond with any known external historical or archaeological sources we have. Okay, let's read that one more time. Because especially for these people who keep trying to laugh about, oh, the Book of Mormon and this is our land, just because they name lands over here, from lands over there, that doesn't mean that this is where things really happened. Did you ever think maybe they actually did the opposite? And when they got over here and they got some of these names, or they just translated them from over here and then they just named them over there? The whole thing is bait and switch. The whole thing is everything happened over there. They're sitting there trying to make everything seem like it happened over there when it happened really over here. And then they said they can't prove anything that they're saying as far as where things happen. Because people always ask us, hey, show us the archaeological evidence that these things happen in America. Prove to me that we know through archaeology. Prove it to me. See, that's what the Gentiles have done. And now we got Hebrews doing exactly the same thing. They've elevated themselves to a point where they seem to think that we need to prove things to them. But they don't have to prove anything to us. They still haven't proven 80 books only. Now, as you can see right here, they can't prove through archaeological evidence that things happened over there in the so-called Middle East. So just like they try to, make us prove certain things, they can't prove it either. All they can do is run and say, well, that's what we've been taught. Well, who taught you that? The people who've been trying to hide everything from us the entire time. It's amazing how, you hear these people try to act all hard and tough guys and talking about the Edomites and talking about the Gentiles, but they practice the same. They do exactly the same practices they do. They elevate themselves with no authority and use Gentile, professors to prove their points. Well, this book is showing you right now that those Gentile archaeologists and everything else can't prove that many of these things that are in the Bible happened over there. So once you come to that conclusion, then you need to take people who call by the Most High will take the next step to try to figure out where these things happened. Let's read that one more time. Hold on the next page here. I'm sorry. Here we go. Of all the events that occur in the Abraham narrative, none of them correspond with any known external historical or archaeological sources we have. This is not to say Abraham was made up. See, that's what they do. They don't say that because it didn't happen in that place. They don't go to the point that, well, maybe it happened somewhere else. They go to the thing, well, they must not have happened. Because see, that's what happens when they've elevated themselves these positions. Either it happened where that's what the wicked say. Either it happened where I said it happened, or it never happened at all. They use some little itty bitty tiny piece of land, and either it happened right here, or it never happened at all. And our people have taken that approach to everything. Oh man, either it happened here or it didn't happen at all. Either we were here in Africa first and we took the slave ships, or it didn't happen at all. We were taking the slave ships from Africa, or it didn't happen at all. That's exactly this. You couldn't have happened and been fulfilled any other way. It could only be fulfilled this one way, that the wicked, that the people who have lied to me about everything said it happened. Because I trust them so much, because they don't lie about anything, do they? I mean, look at them on the news. It's mission accomplished with coronavirus. If anybody wants a test, can get a test. We've already defeated the virus. It's the first wave of coronavirus is done, and we're going to be ready for the second virus. They sit there and they go day by day. They go in front of the cameras and tell you bold-faced lies to your face every day. When have they told you anything that's true? Never. So why would it be any different with archaeological evidence? Why would it be any different with where our homelands are? Why would it be any different with who are the ones that can really interpret the scriptures? They lie about everything. So if they're lying about everything, they're also lying about the archaeology. They're going to tell you the truth about where your lands are. That's what you're telling me? And you're going to believe them over your brethren. Okay. So I'm going to read that again because that was so important. Of all the events that occur in the Abraham narrative, none of them correspond with any known external historical or archaeological sources we have. This is not to say Abraham was made up, but merely to point out that scholars simply do not know for sure when Abraham's story took place in history, because they do not have corroboration. They don't have corroboration. So that means they have no proof. They cannot prove it when things happen, where things happen. We continue right now. They can't prove it. But here we got people in our nation who are fighting to continue these lies with no corroboration. But they want us to provide corroboration for what we say. Makes no sense. They can't prove it, but we have to prove it. We have to prove things when our enemies have hidden everything. That's why you have to have the Holy Spirit. She has to come in and guide us and give us knowledge and direction. Let's continue. With the release of Centuries of Darkness in 1991 by Peter James, a dirty little secret of historiography was let out of the bag. There is a period of several centuries of historical darkness at the end of the late Bronze Age in the received historical chronology of the ancient world. So we're missing hundreds of years right here. James argued that this period of darkness was an artifact of improper chronological accounting of the text. Here we go. A chronological revolution was established that began to rewrite ancient world chronology with a 300-year shift. So they make mistakes and they get to just fix the mistakes. That's what they seem to think. Well, they mess up, but they just get to fix it and keep moving on and stay there and stay in their same positions. And that's what happens with these churches. Churches have been shut down, but preachers still think that they can lead you to heaven. Churches have been shut down, and they seem to think that they still have the authority to teach. They messed up and lied about absolutely everything, but they get to a mulligan and get to just continue in their same lofty positions. That's their mentality. Much of ancient history is anchored in Egyptian chronology that is notoriously ambiguous and imprecise and creates problems for all kinds of historical anchoring of events. Donovan Corville in the 1970s and more recently David Rohl has explored the Egyptian problems to offer a new chronology of the ancient world that roots biblical history in new texts, context, significantly different from the conventional chronology. They too have shaken up the establishment by uncovering the significant chronological problems of the conventional view. In more recent years, Gerald Aardsma has offered the biblical theory that the Exodus occurred in 2450 BC, nearly 1,000 years earlier than the conventional dates of 1445 BC and 1225 BC. This would place Abraham in Mesopotamia around 3000 BC instead of 2000 BC, a radical reconsideration. So all these dudes are all they're doing is guessing. That's all they're doing. They're like, well, we have a new guess. Pretty much that's all they're saying. They put it in big words and everything else. All it is, yeah, we have a new guess now. That's all that this is. But very important is last paragraph. But the reason why this is also important is because the standard interpretation of biblical archaeology is increasingly that the events of the Bible did not happen because they do not line up with the artifactual evidence of archaeology. There is simply no current evidence of a crushing defeat of Egypt or the resultant wandering of the Jews in the desert around the critical, I didn't copy the next page, you can just listen, critical late date of 1275 BC. There is no current evidence of the cities of Ai or Jericho being inhabited, much less destroyed, around the dates that critical biblical scholars say they must have happened. So now we got it where there's no evidence of Ai or Jericho being inhabited, much less destroyed, around the dates that critical biblical scholars say they must have happened. So for all these years, all this time, they've been telling us that these cities were inhabited and destroyed over there in the so-called Middle East, and they've known that there is no evidence whatsoever to corroborate the fact that these events have taken place in the so-called Middle East. Let that sink in. They've known that there's no evidence of this, and they still have pushed the lie for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But you're going to believe everything else that they tell us. They're telling on themselves right here. There's no evidence of this. There's nothing to corroborate what they're saying. But we still got our people over here fighting and arguing with us that these things happened over there. And there's no possible way that they could have happened over here. So if you want to believe people who lie about absolutely everything, have been lying to your face about where these events happened over there when they cannot prove it, then feel free to continue listening to those types of people. But for the rest of us who are going to read and study and research and count on the Most High and count on the Holy Spirit, we will continue searching for the truth. And we will let the Most High lead us to where it is that we need to go. I want to read that last part one more time. But the reason why this is all so important is because the standard interpretation of biblical archaeology is increasingly that the events of the Bible did not happen. Now, see, like I said, they'll say if it's not here, if we can't find evidence that it happened right here in the so-called Middle East, then it just didn't happen. That's the devil for you. He'll destroy your faith either way. Either he'll tell you a lie and say it happened here, or he'll later on say, well, you know what, we were wrong. There's no evidence of that. So destroy your faith either way. Okay. But the reason why this is also important is because the standard interpretation of biblical archaeology is increasingly that the events of the Bible did not happen because they do not line up with the artificial evidence of archaeology. There is simply no current evidence of a crushing defeat of Egypt or the resultant wandering of the Jews in the desert around the critical late date of 1275 BC. There is no current evidence of the cities of Ai or Jericho being inhabited, much less destroyed, around the dates that the critical biblical scholars say they must have happened. Okay. Now they try to make up some other thing like, well, if you go 1,000 years back and there's evidence then, I'm like, dude, you guys have lost all credibility. You don't get to continue to try to make it up, try to change it up or whatever else when you guys have been lying to our face for all this time. They know that they can't prove it, but what do? They try to make us prove absolutely everything. But they have held and put themselves up in these lofty positions to where we need to come to them in order to prove things to them. But they don't have to substantiate anything that they say. So when you get, people in Hebrew groups that do exactly the same thing, be very cautious about that because they're doing exactly the same thing. Putting themselves up in these lofty positions and making it seem as if you need to prove everything to them. None of them have proven 80 books only. None of them have proven that the Most High, is the one that said we can only use 80 books and that's it. That is another thing that Gentiles came up with and that our people just follow along with. That's how they trap you. That's how they, condition you into thinking of what they say, because they only give you certain books to look at that substantiate their narrative. But I was just trying to get that book as ASAP because I know pretty quick they won't be there anymore because there's a lot. This is in the first 15 minutes of you getting a book and what I found. So there's a lot more stuff in here. I just got the book. Thank the Most High for giving us the knowledge and understanding to be able to see and to be able to understand the times and the things that are happening, because it is such a blessing. All praises to the Most High, Yahweh. Acknowledgement to the earthly mother, who is wisdom, who is the Holy Spirit. Acknowledgement to Yahweh Shai. Shalom.